Yes, hi ma'am. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. I hope I'm audible and visible.
Yes, ma'am. Loud and clear.
Okay. And I,
Hi,
I
hi.
and I see is Dato Intan Munera Randi also there?
Uh,
Pretty, are you okay? Yeah. Are we starting on
No.
time?
Hello. Pranav sir has joined
Good
in.
morning, ma'am. Good
Good
morning, Pankaj.
morning. Good morning.
Good
Namaste. My
morning.
name is Preeti Saran.
So, ma'am, we are still waiting for a couple of more panelists. I think my team is trying to. So, ma'am, two more panelists have joined in. We are still, I think we have 1 or 2 minutes. So, we are waiting for two more panelists, Dr. Surat and Dr. Rahul Mishra. So, I hope they will join in shortly.
Yes, that's fine. We can make two more minutes. But meanwhile, a very warm welcome to the panelists who are here on the screen. I can see. So a very warm welcome. Good afternoon. Good morning, depending on the time of the day.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone from Jakarta.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Well, Intan, how are you?
I'm good. You're in Malaysia?
Yeah, I'm in Malaysia. Lah. Yeah.
Yeah, we are actually gearing towards the meetings tomorrow for the ASEAN Summit.
Yeah.
So
That's good.
nearly all the leaders are coming.
Yeah.
That's excellent. Our own Prime Minister is traveling on 6th and 7th.
Yes.
And in spite of the fact that there is extreme preoccupation with Indian presidency of G20,
Yes.
which will be held on 9th and 10th. But in spite of it, he's flying into Jakarta because of the importance he attaches to India
But
ASEAN relations.
I think his schedule is very tight, so uh, he has to be back for G20 meetings also.
Yes.
I I mean, I do not know. It seems to be non-stop. Has been one marathon for us actually
Yes.
between covering G20 in India
Yes.
and also with the ASEAN Chairmanship in Indonesia. So it's really, really. But to be honest, both are equally important. So and so we really putting all our resources, whatever that we can, at both sides.
But knowing Indonesia and its very skillful diplomats, I'm sure it's doing an excellent job of both. So,
Yeah, I can tell that Indonesia's chairmanship will be a very tough act to emulate. Lao would have a really tall order and to fit into the shoes. So wow, it's going to be a very exciting gearing towards 2025.
yes. And then, of course, the ASEAN itself is going through a little bit of a churning with the developments or ongoing situation in Myanmar, and of course,
Mm.
you know, the developments in South China Sea and the map issue with China. So I think that's another thing that should be of
I wonder,
concern.
I wonder how it will look for some of your cities in Chinese characters. I think 6 nations already from the ASEAN side. I think 6 nations already lodged a complaint on that.
Yes, they've rejected it,
Yes.
as have India. India has also completely rejected, their maps, and it's their old
Definitely
habit.
have to.
Yes.
When we speak of the word habit, it's very interesting. You spell it as HIBIT. When you cut off the H, a bit is there. You cut off the A, bit is there. You cut off the B, it is there. Then when you cut off the IT is there. The people who have got habit for T will never leave T. So habit is such a thing which actually you can say, but it remains. But you must understand how to engage in a situation to settle people's habits. And it's nothing new. Whatever we are seeing which is happening is nothing new. It has always been happening. You know, I think looking at the present situation, we've always been discussing, there are things beyond our way of thinking. Because what we think, we expect that to happen. But what others think, they expect that to happen their way. So that is where the conflict is. So we must try to understand what we need and move towards it. I always don't get disappointed. I don't get upset. You know, then we are going to have a good discussion today. And then you can see that the things which have happened over the years and where we are heading to is something totally different. From our school of thought, from our way of thinking, is something different. The way others think is something different. But yet, we have to manage it, balance it, and move forward. You know?
That's a very wise way of putting it. And
I always speak that this in 2015, I was just sharing something with you. When Prime Minister Modi ji came to Malaysia, Malaysia was the chair for ASEAN. We are going to take the chair again in 2025. So we had a discussion on the table, and Modi ji had just taken office, and he came up with the idea: "Make in India, made in India." So he said, we are going to move towards uh, exports, make in India, made in India, and when we want to link with the ASEAN countries. So on the table of discussion, there were four of us. My minister was there. The High Commissioner, Mr. Trumurti, was there. Modi ji was there. So when he passed on this message, everyone nodded the head and said, "It's a very good idea. Very good." Because no one dare tell the Prime Minister that what he's telling, how they feel about it. It could be right, it could be wrong, but everyone, when someone says something, they say it's very, very good. So in the conversation when everyone said very good, I just kept quiet. So मोदी जी से अब क्या सोचता है? मैंने बोला मोदी जी ये नहीं हो सकता है. ये कैसे नहीं हो सकता है? क्यों नहीं हो सकता है? Why this can't happen? Why it won't happen? I said, if I want to set up a factory in Tamil Nadu, I have to import my raw materials from Punjab if I want to do some business. But my interstate tax is 35%. How am I going to manufacture and export goods out of India when there are a lot of hurdles which I have to cross? So he just looked at me and said, "Kya karna chahiye? What shall we do?" I said, the best thing is to put GST. That was in 2015. In 2017, India came into the regime of GST. You know, what I mean to say is, what I'm trying to say here is that if you feel something, you must express yourself. Only by expressing yourself that the opposite person also can understand from it. I've been in this ASEAN back. Before ASEAN India, I was in ASEAN back. I was a secretary for the ASEAN Business Advisory Council. There are a lot of things which have happened within ASEAN. Then I moved on to ASEAN India for the last 13 years, and I see a lot of things have been happening. So I think there's a way of really actually trying to convince. I actually was on this platform when Minister Kamal Nath was there. Then Minister Nirmala Sitharaman came later. So I was with the Suresh Prabhu was there, and now Piyush Goyal is here. So all these ministers have been on this platform, and we've been always discussing about a lot of things about ASEAN India.
Dato, you should write a book about it, because you have the institutional memory, and it'll be very good. It'll be good for India ASEAN relations to
So
have your experience captured over the years.
So I always feel that there are a lot of good things which have happened, and a lot of good things which have happened, we have moved forward, we have strengthened ourselves, and our hope and vision is always there, because I always feel everyone asks me a question. Are you an Indian? I say, yes, I'm an Indian, but I'm a Malaysian by birth. So it does not matter whether you're an Indian or a Malaysian or an ASEAN member. The objective here is sitting in a business council, we want to see the links grow to a different level. It is not about us. So this is something which we have to really try to think and move forward.
Pankaj, you trying to
Dato,
say something?
yeah, Dato, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think now most of the our panelists have joined in.
Yes.
Dr. Surat is running late. He's busy with something, so he will be joining in 5 minutes. So I think we can start the panel discussion, and he will join in meanwhile.
Yeah.
So, good morning, formal good morning to everyone, and a warm welcome to this panel discussion. Uh, so, dear friends, all of us know that this week Jakarta is going to host several important meetings. Leaders from different parts of the world are gathering in Jakarta to participate in ASEAN summit process and associated meetings and summits. Notably, these summits are taking place when we are going through a very difficult phase. We know that ongoing digital transformation, climate change, as well as the geostrategic shifts have been posing several formidable challenges to the region. On top of these, there have been concerns regarding South China Sea and Myanmar. These summits and related meetings are expected to see deliberation on all these issues, particularly in Indo-Pacific context. ASEAN and India are strategic partners and share most of these concerns. In this context, we are organizing this panel discussion to understand the pertinent issues ASEAN and its partner countries, especially India, have been facing and what could be the potential way forward. We are fortunate today to have Ambassador Preeti Saran with us, uh, who has very kindly agreed to chair this panel discussion. Ambassador Saran does not need any introduction. She has been an outstanding diplomat. She has served India as ambassador to several countries, including Russia, Egypt, Bangladesh, Geneva, etc. Ambassador Saran has been a keen observer of East Asia. During her term as Secretary East at Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, she played a significant role in fostering economic and political relations between ASEAN and India. Ambassador Saran has also served as member of UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Currently, she is a member of Governing Council of Indian Council for World Affairs, New Delhi. Madam, welcome and thank you very much for accepting our request to chair this session. Without any further ado, I would request you to kindly take over and start the panel discussion. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you, Pankaj, for that very generous and lavish introduction. I don't think I really deserve such an introduction, but I'm very moved and thank you very much. I just want to say how happy I am to welcome fellow panelists in today's discussion on ASEAN summit process and associate meetings, issues and the way forward. I think it's particularly timely as we were discussing just before we formally started our session about the fact that Prime Minister Modi will be traveling on 6th and 7th of September to attend the 20th India ASEAN Summit, then the 18th East Asia Summit, as well as other related meetings. I have personally, in my capacity as Secretary East, seen firsthand the buzz around, the summit, ASEAN and related summit meetings. And I know that there's a lot of excitement as far as India is concerned. The fact that, we have extreme preoccupation with our chairmanship of the G20 presidency. Yet, in spite of that, and that's going to take place on 9th and 10th of September in New Delhi, but in spite of that, the fact that our Prime Minister is making has decided to travel to Jakarta shows the importance he attaches to India ASEAN relations, to ASEAN centrality and unity in the Indo Pacific, to our bilateral relations with Indonesia, as well as with other ASEAN countries, as well as to the commitment to India's Act East policy. As Dato was mentioning earlier, that we can really record the evolution of India-ASEAN relations from the time that we started with very modest beginnings as a sectoral partner in 1992 to become a dialogue partner in 1995, and which was further upgraded to a summit level meeting in 2002. The fact that we upgraded the relationship to a strategic partner in 2012, and last year we further upgraded it to a comprehensive strategic relationship, just shows the immense attention that has been given both from the 10 countries of ASEAN, the ASEAN as a regional grouping, as well as by India to this relationship, because I think both sides realize the immense value it poses both for India and for ASEAN. I see that India today is one of the fastest growing economies. And the 10 ASEAN countries are also equally dynamic, and so there is immense potential for cooperation. Of course, in trade and investment and economic activity, but also we share very similar values on a lot of strategic and geopolitical issues, and which is where I think the India ASEAN relationship has really evolved. Certainly, our leaders, when they meet in a couple of days, will get a chance to review the achievements of ASEAN and the way forward. But I think our today's panel discussion will also be a very important opportunity. I'm aware that ASEAN and India both give a lot of attention to the feedback and the inputs that come from the think tanks and universities, etc. Which is why in the last 1 year, through the time that we celebrated the year of friendship between India and ASEAN, a series of activities have been undertaken to give a major boost to the India ASEAN relations, particularly the special ASEAN India Foreign Ministers meeting, the high level conference on renewable energy, a startup festival, a network of universities, the seventh round of the network of think tanks, a youth festival, a music festival. All of that, I think, has also provided a lot of inputs. And likewise, I feel that today's panel discussion, a very distinguished panel, will also give us an opportunity to discuss the way forward. Now, before I request the distinguished panelists to take the floor, I will just quickly run through the order and tell you that today it's now 10:47. We have a hard stop at 12 o'clock. We would definitely like to reserve questions in the end to make it more interactive. But I thought I would request the panel speakers and give them perhaps 12 minutes each, just to manage time better. 12 minutes for each panel speaker to share their initial thoughts. We will go one by one through the panelists and then open the floor for question answers and discussions. After the question answers are over, perhaps in the end, we will request our distinguished panelists to just make some concluding remarks for about 2 minutes each to, their thoughts on the whole process of our discussions today. I'll quickly run through the order of speakers. I know that we are still expecting Dorit Surat Horai Chakul to join us, but perhaps we could go in the order of starting with Dr. Intan Murnira Ramli, followed by Datu Ramesh Kondamal. And then, if Dr. Surat joins by then, certainly I'll request him. Otherwise, I'll request Mr. Pranam Kumar to kindly take over. And after that, Dr. K. Yom. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Dr. Yom. And then finally, we'll request Dr. Rahul Mishra to kindly share his thoughts. So without much ado, may I request Dr. Intan Murnira Ramli to kindly make her initial remarks for about 12 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon from Jakarta and a very good morning to those in India. Please allow me to thank RIS for inviting me. This is a very good opportunity to actually say something about what has been happening in ASEAN, between ASEAN and India. And I think I definitely am thankful for this opportunity. So for the presentation, what I would actually speak about is really about the growing India's and ASEAN's economic relationship, and then about the recent partnership between ASEAN and India, and perhaps possibilities for return to RCEP, and why ASEAN is important in terms of its central role in RCEP, and of course the possibility of the deepening of India ASEAN partnership. So from that, next slide, please. Yeah. So we can see here basically almost every economic metric indicates that India is indeed one of the ASEAN most important and strategic development partners. So from this slide, we can see the rising importance of India in terms of trade over the past 2 decades. So we see on the left panel, ASEAN's total trade value with India has grown by the factor of almost 9, from 13 billion US dollars in 2003 to $113 million by 2022. It is not only rising in absolute terms, but it has also risen in terms of global share from just 1.5% in 2003 to 2.9 in 2022. So you can see that how trade with India contributed to 2.9% of ASEAN's total trade with the world in 2022. The same trend is also evident for ASEAN's trade in services with India, which grew from about 2 billion US dollars in 2005 to almost 12 billion by 2021. So we see that the importance of India in particular has been growing from a 1.6% share back in 2005 to 2.9% by 2021. So in that, we see that the trend is that India has been a large exporter of services to ASEAN of late, particularly in key sectors such as ICT and other professional services. Next slide, please. So similarly, rising trend is also observed in terms of FDI. The left panel shows that the share of FDI flows coming to India from ASEAN country has risen from just 2% in 2004 to as high as 33% in 2022. So Singapore is responsible for almost all the FDI into India from ASEAN. Meanwhile, we see that the right panel, the value chain linkage between ASEAN and India has been rising in recent times, as indicated by the higher GVC participation index in 2018 compared to 2005. So India's supply chain exchanges with ASEAN are actually one of the largest in the region, although there are room for improvement because currently there's a lack of key industry that integrates ASEAN and India. It's still lagging behind Japan and China. Next slide, please. So from the partnership that we have, basically in terms of historically, ASEAN-India trade is governed by several agreements. So you have back then in 2004, a framework agreement of comprehensive economic cooperation between ASEAN and India, which entered into force, laying the groundwork for future cooperation between both parties. And then another landmark agreement was achieved in 2010 for ASEAN-India Free Trade Agreement. I was part of that negotiation, as well as was really relieved at the end of the day for the completion. It was signed and entered into force then. And then it was then accompanied by two agreements on trade in goods, ATIGA and ITIGA, and also on services in 2014. So in between those times, India has also concluded several bilateral FTAs or CECA with individual ASEAN member states such as Singapore in 2005 and Malaysia in 2011. So this is to further enhance benefits from the ASEAN-India FTA. In the meantime, we see that India bilateral FTAs with Indonesia, Philippines, and Thailand are currently under feasibility studies or under negotiation. There are also talks among parties actually for possible update and also upgrade of the ASEAN-India FTA and the ASEAN-India Trade in Goods Agreement. So to further enhance cooperation between ASEAN and India, so that we can actually better reflect contemporary economic issues, including aligning the elements to an upgraded ADIGA. Next slide, please. So this is, talking about regional economic cooperation, of course, like it or not, RCEP is still the elephant in the room as the largest trading bloc, not only in the ASEAN Pacific region, but also in the world to date. So we know that there have been much interest among the RCEP members to have India rejoin as a member after it withdrew in November 2019. So from the conversation that we have among all the ASEAN member states and also some bilateral partners, definitely the sentiment is that to welcome India back into RCEP at any time and to acknowledge that India is indeed Asia Pacific's second largest economy and one of the ASEAN's most strategic trade and development partners. So of course, while ASEAN do understand in terms of India concerns and decisions, but here could be some possible considerations that India might want to take on board as we ponder on possible return to RCEP. So number one, rejoining RCEP would actually allow India to gain substantial market access, important services sectors such as ICT, healthcare, nursing, education. And so this is where India has comparative advantage and may not want to miss on. The second is that failure to join RCEP somehow could potentially result in some negative trade diversion away from India, as some countries prefer to trade with or enjoy preferential arrangements on RO given by RCEP members. So this is something India might also want to consider or even further study on the benefits. And in this currently hyper-connected world of global supply chain, India would definitely benefit from the integrated logistics and supply chain had it been part of RCEP. So conversely, not being in RCEP might let somehow loss of competitiveness in terms of supply chain connectivity relative to RCEP members, potentially at the expense of Indian consumers and firms. And the fourth, while RCEP may not be perfect, India should also consider about whether the options on the table are currently viable. For instance, like not joining RCEP would mean India may pivot to CPTPP. And from my work with CPTPP, I see that requirements are stricter in some areas and involving countries which are geographically more distant. So trade creation effects from such cooperation would somehow be smaller from those who are parties in the RCEP. And another possibility, of course, is to form bilateral FTAs with multiple different countries in the West. But this is potentially costly and inefficient, and India may have to comply with higher labor or environmental standards typically required by the Western partners. The fifth is we see that RCEP is an arrangement that is based on ASEAN centrality, and this definitely will deepen the ASEAN-India relationship. And of course, in the next slide, I will show that the important role of ASEAN in RCEP under several important economic metrics. And lastly, whether India would rejoin RCEP hinges on whether there could be any middle grounds or compromises on the India's concern, particularly issues on the auto-trigger mechanism of the safeguard measures, or even to address on the movement of natural person. Next slide, please. So here, I would like to show on the RCEP in terms of to show that ASEAN is an important player and how it actually contributes in the RCEP. And the next slide, please. Okay. India is also becoming a very a more strategic partner of ASEAN, and there are several discussions or proposal to update or upgrade the current cooperation in the ASEAN-India FTA and also in ASEAN-India trade in goods. So basically what we want to show is that both parties could consider about how upgraded ASEAN-India FTA can address a number of modern issues that have not been previously touched, or such as digital transition, e-commerce, circular economy, green investment, and intellectual property. So we can actually draw lessons from plurilateral agreements such as CPTPP, RCEP, and all the recent FTAs signed by India. Second, given that services have grown in importance for both India and ASEAN's export structure, so it could be appropriate from the upgraded framework to actually discuss on how to facilitate services cooperation between the two parties, especially for sectors like ICT, healthcare, construction, engineering, education, or other services sector with good complementarity between India and ASEAN. The third one, to actually find a mutually beneficial approaches to how to further liberalize agriculture and food products. And lastly, my point is that to identify and address obstacles to the full utilization of current agreements, because some of our studies in area which show that ASEAN-India FTA is among the least utilized ASEAN FTAs among ASEAN firms. I'm not sure whether this same issue is happening on the Indian side, but it is good if on the ground technical issues can be addressed in the next iteration of the agreement. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Uh, Thank you so much, Dr. Intan Ramli, for your very, very sagacious and very erudite presentation. I can agree with almost everything. I'm not the trade expert here, but I can tell you that as far as the RCEP is concerned, certainly we have concerns. We also have concerns on the India ASEAN free trade agreement on goods. Fortunately, our economic ministers recently met, and I think they've agreed to review some of the areas of concern. And so it's very happy to hear from you that if the ASEAN partners are prepared to look at the concerns of India, particularly because I think there is a huge imbalance of trade. And I think that is an area of concern, as is rules of origin issues about whether goods that are coming into India, in fact, are originating. And I think those are the concerns that also come into our RCEP discussions as well. But no, I'll leave that part to our discussions following all the presentations. I must apologize. I was remiss in not introducing you, but that is because you don't need any introduction, as is very obvious, from the background that you're sitting in. For those who have just joined in, actually, Dr. Ramli is with the Department of Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, and which is why, and she has done a lot of work and advised ASEAN member states as well as the government of Malaysia on a lot of trade related issues and emerging economies, etc. So we are very happy and privileged to have this excellent presentation made by her, which has set the tone, certainly as far as India ASEAN trade and investment related issues are concerned. We'll move on to the next speaker, although I had said that we will move on to Dato Ramesh Kondamal, but I've just been informed that Dr. Surat Horai Chaikul, a very warm welcome to you, Dr. Surat. I hope you can hear us. I believe that he has a medical emergency, and so he will need to leave shortly. So, which is why I'll just jump the queue for him and request Dr. Surat Horai Chaikul, Director of Indian Studies Center at the Chulalongkorn University, to kindly make his presentation. Dr. Surat, very warm welcome. And just thought I'd let you know, for in the interest of time, and I know that you yourself have to rush back. We thought we will request all the panelists to make their initial remarks for about 12 minutes and then move on to discussion. So I just thought I'd share that information with you. Please, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and very sorry for being quite rude to jump in like this to all of you, whom I have great respect for, and thank you very much to RIS, Sachinji, who has been putting us together, in various platforms and so on. I just came back from Dhaka, and my father's health is not very good, and I had to run with the university and hospital from time to time. But again, to come in a little bit to see all of your faces, even though online, make me very happy also. And I think this is, of course, undoubtedly my excitement with regard to ASEAN-India relations, that we can do more. Now, I am not an expert on economics, okay? And undoubtedly, I have been involved with what negotiation after early harvest between India and Thailand for a very long time and so on, okay? But again, I think economic relations, as our previous speakers have stated, can do more and so on with the concept of RCEP, because ASEAN members keep asking all the time, when would India come back, to this RCEP? We are waiting for India. And this is the kinds of questions that I face. My students ask me all the time whenever the lectures involved with ASEAN and India. So I definitely think that, we have a lot of expectations that soon India will come in. And I believe that, India can definitely exert its influence also, very positive mutual benefits level, which of course India has always stood for. But now again, for me, one of the most challenging tasks about ASEAN India is that can we also look at from outside economic relations also? Is it possible? right? Because economic relations undoubtedly are very important, and that's why the business community students talk about RCEP all the time, you know. But again, for example, science and technology, can it be more developed, because what India is a very charming country in terms of science and technology, okay? And when India recently sent Chandrayaan-3 to the moon, the south polar side, it became like good news even among Thai people. They were very excited. And at the same time, India also emphasized many times about the cost, that it is relatively not expensive, in comparison to other countries. And this is something very attractive. To me, I would, please excuse my language, I think India is very sexy in this sort of aspect, that it can actually help. And when Prime Minister Modi mentions that this is not only about the success of India, it's also about, humanities, and perhaps we can see India ASEAN level more than the kind of national interest as such, but extend it, to the kind of knowledge of science and technology, which of course Indian has been doing more and more. But at the same time, we need to ask, what actually obstructs the kind of development that we could have done more, So undoubtedly, this is one of the area. Secondly, I would like to share with you with the experience with regard to women scientists behind Chandrayaan-3. Okay, it's quite an excitement out here, that this is the country, where women wear sari, salwar, kameez, sitting there, and they are delivering all what they can deliver, to make their nation so proud also, but at the same time, making other people so happy about it. So I guess, we, in this part of the world, sometimes we need to move out from the framework of established traditional relations, and then come up more on the needs of really ASEAN member countries need, okay, that we can work on. All ambassadors of India in ASEAN countries, and especially in Thailand, now we are, and Mr. Nagesh Singh is here, all have been very active, okay? Before this, also Ambassador Suchitra Durai, But again, I still feel that there is something that is obstructing us, that we are not, we can do more than this, And this is something that we here don't understand either. Okay, what's happening with it? Is it about perceptions or something? So there's good news, good mood about India. At the same time, perhaps when we compare ASEAN relations with some other countries, there are certain areas that perhaps we can do more on this, So I think this is something that a platform like this is so important, and I will not spend too much time in here. What I think is that rather than making this meeting only ends it here, perhaps RIS, I think, is the most important institution here. And if Professor Sachin Chaturvedi is with me here also, that, we can actually meet, and have workshops on this also, and come up with more than presentation and frank perspective, on what we can do more to ensure that ASEAN India can strengthen the relations. Please bear in mind that ASEAN and India are nearly the same thing also, okay? Because of the culture, linkage, civilizational, the maritime neighbors, the borders, we share a number of things together. But then the questions that we here scholars face is that maybe we are not clicking on the right button yet, What is that, And I think it's a job for all of us, whether we are in academia, diplomats, or, those practitioners, those who have so much experience, like, Ambassador Priti Sharan and others, can always come together. Okay, not only academia platform, but practitioners, civil servants also. You know, how do we break the traditional mold that have been put upon us, and we move forward better than that? So I think, one of the examples that I think was so wonderful by India is the IIT scholarship to ASEAN countries. The most important thing is not only about IIT scholarship, but India has gone beyond TOEFL and IELTS requirement, by directly interviewing the candidates who want to study and so on. This is, amazing, you can do a number of things, out of box and so on. We on the ASEAN side here, we also need to think also, how do we move this relation in nearly every aspect. So I guess I would like to end it here, as I need to rush to hospitals, to meet the doctors with regard to my father's condition. But maybe next time if we meet in Bangkok, where maybe outside Bangkok, we have some kind of like a closed workshop where you are not allowed to go out much, you are somewhere, so we can actually brainstorm together certain kinds of idea and make sure that how we strengthen the bond between ASEAN and India. So thank you very much, and long live ASEAN-India relations. Okay, thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Surat Horai Chaikul. Wish your father a very speedy recovery. Very grateful to you that, in spite of your extreme preoccupation with your father's health and concern, you still found time for our panel discussion. That shows your own commitment, your own personal commitment. So when you talk about let's identify newer areas, beyond economic issues, I think just this personal contact and connection. We always describe India-ASEAN relations as three C's. Commerce, culture, and connectivity. And connectivity is not just physical connectivity, but also economic connectivity and people to people connectivity. And the fact that people of Indian origin and so much of the people commitment to bilateral relations and India ASEAN relations is itself, I think, a very important asset which can come together to identify newer areas to energize India ASEAN relations. You did talk about, acknowledge the role of Indian women scientists as something that is unheard of in other parts of the world. I can tell you that, we get our values and systems from the Western countries, but USA has so far not produced a woman president. We've had a woman prime minister many years back. The Wall Street, which is the leader on financial sector, has not had a single woman leader in the banks. At one stage, both our biggest public sector and the private sector banks are all led by women. So, there is no glass ceiling there. And I think it's equally true of many ASEAN countries, that what is looked at as traditional societies where women are expected to play a different role, but today they're very much, empowered and part of growth and development. And so, thank you for that observation. We'll now move on to our next speaker, Dato Ramesh Kondamal, who's co-chair of the ASEAN India Business Council. Dato needs no introduction either, because of his long association with India ASEAN framework, particularly on business and trade. Currently, as chairman of Goldtex Group of Companies, I think he has contributed a lot, both in his previous capacity as well as his current capacity, in giving a boost to India ASEAN trade and business. And so, without much ado, I request Dr. Dato Ramesh Kondamal to kindly share his thoughts for the next 12 minutes. Thank you. I think you're on mute, Dato. You're on the mute. Could you unmute yourself?
Is it okay now?
It's okay now.
Good. A very good afternoon to you, Madam Excellency, fellow speakers on the panel today. I bring you greetings from Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur. ASEAN India had been a topic which I've often spoken of, and is actually interesting as it goes on day by day. I can see things happening. And actually, tomorrow, on the 6th, I think the Prime Minister of India will be in Jakarta for the meeting with ASEAN leaders and also for the East Asia Business Summit. And there's something again happening in ASEAN, which is the new ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum, which will take place for the first time. So you can see that there are a lot of good things which are online and which are happening for ASEAN. And yet, we are so near, and for so many years, we feel we are so far. We have the connectivity, we have the cultural relationship with us, we have the borders and the maritime uh, borders with us, but somehow or the other, like my earlier speaker said, there is something there that we are not moving. I remembered in school when I had a group of friends, my friend told me, if your friend is boy, I'm not going to be your friend. So that sort of culture must not be created. We must have the strength to overcome this and move forward. I know most of you all on the panel could be professional, might be professors or lecturers, but I have been a core businessman for the last 50 years. And my thinking is totally different than others. And I personally feel where the economic strength lies, that's where the growth engine is. And this growth engine is nothing new. If you see in the 50s and 60s, you could see US developing to different levels, Europe moved on to different levels. You saw Japan moving, and then you saw Korea, Taiwan. Investments came to ASEAN, and China started moving, and now it's India's turn. So this is a cycle, and India is in a cycle to move forward. We can see India's GDP is moving forward. India will be the third largest GDP or fourth largest within the next few years. India has got the largest population now, 1.5 billion. Another 15 years, you might have 1.7 billion. The lower income group in India will become a middle income group. All these are the signs which we can see. And this has also happened in the ASEAN countries for years. All have moved to different levels. But what we must understand is, how are we actually going to hold our hands and move forward and not leave each other along the line? This is something which is actually very important. We have spoken about trade earlier. We have spoken about the ASEAN FTA earlier. ASEAN FTA has not been reviewed for so many years. When I first took the chair of ASEAN India Business Council, at that point of time, the FTA was formed, and now up till now it has not been reviewed. So what is the magic behind it that it is taking so much of time? It's very interesting. When we had this FTA, it was close to 12 years ago. And today, India is in a different footing. India sees differently. We were starting to work for the RCEP. We wanted RCEP, India to join us on this platform. But at the last moment, India said, no, we are not ready for it yet. ASEAN said, no problem, we take some time. But what I see now is something different. India wants to review the ASEAN-India FTA, might be with the same terms and conditions of RCEP. Because India has already got an FTA with Australia, is having an FTA with Japan, has a good FTA with ASEAN country, but they have to review it to a different level so that ASEAN and India can trade at different levels. Let's not be worried. There's no problem in this. India can take its stand and must take its stand. But ASEAN will see that we work with India, because if you look at a weighing scale, we have on one side India, on the other side China. It's not possible for ASEAN to back out of China. It's not possible to leave India. We need both. And economically, where the business sense makes, ASEAN is going to move forward strongly with both the countries. Investments from China are huge in ASEAN. We need more investment from India, and ASEAN has to invest more in India in time to come. And that is where we are seeing, earlier my dear friend was telling, what is happening? What is happening? I think we must be very bold in understanding what is happening so that we can take and move forward. This is actually what is happening. There's nothing else happening. We have to be very open about things. We have to take a direction. We have to move. We know for the next 15 to 20 years, India is the growth engine. And ASEAN has to work very closely with India for a benefit for ASEAN and India moving forward. India has got all the advantages. I think where trade is concerned is one of the first advantage which ASEAN and India can have with each other. Our relationship has been good for centuries. There's nothing wrong with relationship between ASEAN and India. Our relationship stands and has been good. Our first Prime Minister from Malaysia, Tunku Abdul Rahman, was a very close friend of the first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru. Singapore had very good relationship from independence time with India. Indonesia, if you see, has got very good cultural relationship in one way or the other with India. India has got a very young population. We must remember that. More than 40% of India's population is a young population. That's a great advantage to ASEAN. When you're talking of trade, we are talking of marketing, the young population can be tapped and ASEAN can benefit a lot from India. 20 years ago, the trade between ASEAN and India was only 9 billion. Today, it is 150 billion after the pandemic. We can see things have moved to a different level, but this is not to our expectation from ASEAN. We want to have more trade with India. We want India to grow further with us. We want Indian industries to come and invest in ASEAN countries. Like, for example, in Malaysia, we have got 8 FTAs and 7 bilateral agreements. For any investor pumping in here, he has got a world market to benefit from. We would like to learn from the Indians what they can do to help us here. And we also would like to make some investments in India from the ASEAN side to see how we can work together. The greatest problem today is in India, the corporate businesses control most of the businesses. We from the ASEAN side have always been harping to see that how we can tap on the SMEs. SMEs is a huge platform. 97% of India businesses are SMEs. Same with ASEAN. So can you just imagine if we work and put in our effort between ASEAN and India to tap these SMEs to work together and take them to a different level. Within 15, 20 years, it'll be a different atmosphere of trade and business within ASEAN and India. Today, we need food security. Food security is something we are talking about it. And India has got the strength to support ASEAN in this area for food security. And we know that we can depend on India. During the COVID, when India started providing vaccines to the world, and for its 1.5 billion people, we in ASEAN realized that India has got the strength. We have learned a lot of things from India, and we expect to work closer with India. But we are actually, if you look at ASEAN, it is a business platform. Our exports are huge in the world. We understand business and we want to do business, but we do not want restrictions of kinds to stop us in certain areas. So I would like to request on our new reviewing of our FTA that some easiness comes between us so that we can expand our businesses on both sides. We understand the problem. We can see the problem, which I mentioned. But that problem should not hinder us from progressing between ASEAN and India. I again will come back to the next thing. Today, if you look at it in the world, India has been very good in digitization, in fintech. They're moving forward. ASEAN would like to learn from India because we feel that investments on this platform will be beneficial to ASEAN. So our doors in ASEAN are always open, and I'm very sure India has got the same attitude, but we have to understand what the requirements for both of us are. Like Madam did mention in the opening speech of our geopolitical problems, even within ASEAN, for Myanmar and things like that, this is going to happen in time to come everywhere. And it only will move forward, but we must know how to manage it, try to handle it, and take a situation which does not affect us. So I'm very sure that looking at the whole situation, ASEAN-India relationship is very good. We want to move together. I want two things to be done with ASEAN and India. From my view, I want the SME sectors to grow. I want the youth to move forward. I've also suggested to my government here that why can't we have some Indian universities coming into ASEAN? What's wrong? Instead of going to Western countries, India has got good universities. We can plow some education system in ASEAN where our students can benefit instead of going far across to the West. We can have good universities here with degrees which we can recognize. I think these are the things we should start looking at it in the future where our relationship can be enhanced. So with that, I think I have said what I would like to say,
Thank
but
you.
I'm very sure connectivity is a very important thing. I learned two words. One is contact and one is connection. We might all say we have got contacts, but where is the connection? The connection must come in with our dear Indian friends in the business platform, on other platforms, on the cultural platforms, on understanding things, where this connection will be the lifeline.
Thank you.
Malaysia had just what you call that agreed 3 new flights to India, to Ahmedabad, to Trichy, and other areas. So Malaysia wants to be in contact with India, and so do the other countries in ASEAN. With that, thank you very much, and I
Thank
hope
you.
that we'll have another discussion.
Thank you very much, Dato, for your very wise words and for pointing out exactly where we should be focusing on, and that is on the economic issues because the growth engine is really there. I think all three previous speakers have raised some very important points, identifying way forward. And I think the focus has largely been on the FTA and the need for boosting greater trade and investment between India and ASEAN. And I would say that our next speaker perhaps is the right person to respond to some of the questions that have been raised by previous speakers. So I'd request Mr. Pranav Kumar, Vice President, International Trade Policy and Compliance, Reliance Industries Limited, who has also had a professional experience in teaching, research, and project management and policy advocacy on trade and issues. So I think he would be just the right person, not only to make his presentation and share his thoughts, but also to be able to respond to specific questions that have been raised by our panelists, the previous three speakers. So, Mr. Pranav Kumar, you have the floor. We'll restrict it to 12 minutes in the beginning, and then if there's time, we can continue. So thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you, RIS, for this opportunity. So, as you have introduced me, so I represent Reliance Industries Limited, but of course, I don't claim to be representing the entire Indian industry, which is very diverse and wide. But I'm new to Reliance. Just I've completed 1 year, and it's a large organization. But previously, for 10 years, I spent at the Confederation of Indian Industry as head of international trade policy. So in that capacity, I worked quite extensively with government, both Department of Commerce, MEA and all, and followed all these issues very closely, particularly the regional comprehensive economic partnership from the day one to till the on 4th of November when India has walked out from the RCEP. So I have some viewpoint which I'll definitely respond to that. But before that, my three fellow panelists and of course chairperson, they have set the context of this very important and very timely session. And of course, ma'am, you spoke about the growing institutional linkages between India and ASEAN. And over the last 30 years, since 1992, it has strengthened quite immensely. And particularly these days, there are multiple level we are engaging at the government to government level. Second speaker, of course, he spoke about RCEP. He made a very strong argument in favor of India coming back in the RCEP bloc. And Dr. Surat mentioned about that we have to look and go beyond economic and trade relations. It spoke about cooperation in science and all. And Mr. Dato Ramesh spoke about we can explore our partnership in food security, MSMEs, etc., etc. So having said that, let me just give you a first overview of what I have prepared my intervention. So what has happened, at least purely from the Indian industry point of view, so in spite of the strong and growing government-to-government engagement, the private sector, by and large, looked at India-ASEAN relationship more from the very narrow lens of trade, I would say, not even trade and investment. So that's why when we signed the FTA and operationalized in 2010, so since then, we have been only talking about how much we have been able to export our products, how much imports are coming, and we are trying to see what is the trade deficit. And of course, this has, I won't say it has worsened, but of course, it has slightly increased the trade deficit against India, between India and ASEAN. So that has been the major focal point of discussion within the private sector and also private sector and government. But now the situation has changed because first, of course, India G20 presidency, which is, of course, for last 1 year, not 1 year, I would say 9 months, we have completed ever since we took over the presidency on 1st of December. A huge amount of sensitization has happened because Prime Minister Modi mentioned that this is going to be a people-centric, people G20 for India. So we have organized events in more than 50 cities, covering all those possible issues ranging from economic and trade issues, sustainability, digital transformation, environment, Prime Minister pet mission of life, that is lifestyle for environment. So of course, there are a lot many issues on which Indian people and Indian private sectors are sensitized. And that would definitely help Indian private sector to look at the India-ASEAN relationship more from a broader perspective. And that is what we are hoping. So looking at the India-ASEAN trade, if I come to trade particularly, so still, if you add both goods and services, it's hardly not even 150 US dollar billion. So comparing with the US, ASEAN and China trade figure, that is close to $1 trillion, which is only goods. ASEAN Japan, which is close to 250 billion, again, only goods, and ASEAN Korea, that is also close to 150 billion. So comparing India's position with three other major economies of the region. So India, of course, I won't say little, but of course, far behind these regions. And of course, from investment side also, we are lagging behind. So we have to see how we can try to further scale up our economic and trade relations with ASEAN regions. And the kind of issues which are emerging now, and we see a lot of complementarity. So we have to offer a lot, and we also have to gain a lot from the ASEAN side. So now, if I refer to the this year's ASEAN summit, the 42nd, which will happen in May, and now the 43rd, which is going to happen. So there are three major issues which are, of course, of the important items for discussion. One is, of course, energy transition, where, of course, they are trying to create ecosystem for electric vehicle ecosystem development. Second is the regional payment system, where you are aware that we have excelled a lot, and we have the largest digital payment gateway, that is UPI. And third is the health part, One Health initiative. And all these three issues are extremely important. For instance, on the EVs and all, we have to learn a lot from ASEAN side. On regional payment, we can offer the way we have developed our payment gateway. And third is again health. Health is a mutual challenge, and we have seen how we have suffered during the COVID pandemic. And of course, this is not only for India and ASEAN, but of course the entire humanity, entire world. This is a major challenge across developed and developing countries, how we can strengthen our health infrastructure. And this is also one of the focus agenda item for India G20 presidency, where under the finance track we are talking about financing the health infrastructure. So these are three important areas where, of course, we can gain a lot by having a closer cooperation. Now, coming to the last year of India ASEAN Economic Summit, which was attended by Honorable Vice President of India. So there are 6 important issues which have come up for discussion, and where we have declared joint statement, and we will move forward to cooperate. One, of course, is the review of India-ASEAN Free Trade Agreement. In fact, last month also, in the economic ministers meeting, we have further reiterated and set out agenda to move forward. This is important because that would address a lot of concerns of Indian industry, particularly on the aspect of non-tariff barriers, particularly on the aspect of the violation of rules of origin, and the other issues also, which are the agenda item for the review. And we are eagerly looking for this process to get expedited, and we get a tangible outcome out of that. Second is ASEAN-India cooperation on digital economy. So this is extremely important because if you look at the India G20 presidency also, the Prime Minister has been talking about digital public good. There has been a lot of emphasis on this part because how India has played a major role in digital transformation. And here I would say in digital transformation, the private sector of India has played a major role. Unlike in case of space technology, which is government-led primarily in India, of course, private sector is now playing some role in that. But the space advancements and space technology is the government of India, it's all government-led. So here again, India has to offer a lot, particularly the way we have used digital technology for the good governance, for the many social and developmental programs, etc., etc. Third is the payment, as I mentioned, that unified payment system, digital payment, where again we have developed a very strong mechanism, and of course, country like Singapore has already has adopted and partnered with us. Fourth is the energy transition, which is extremely important. That again is a common challenge for both because we have set a target of achieving the net zero by 2070, and this requires we have to transit to renewable. So that's what footing the preparations are going on. As Prime Minister, while addressing last week the B20 summit, and he mentioned that particularly about the critical minerals. He said that the critical minerals are located in a few, reserves are in the few locations, but it's a common need for all countries. So we must make sure that there should not be any disruption in the supply of critical minerals. And ASEAN and India can again cooperate and make sure that this area we develop a model which could be adopted by other countries as well. Fifth item is that enhancing the healthcare. As I said, I won't repeat it any further. And sixth, of course, my fellow panelists also mentioned about India, ASEAN-India cooperation in the space sector. As I said, that is more government-led, but of course, we have to offer a lot. Just I'll spend 1 more minute, ma'am, on the some of the questions, particularly in RCEP.
Yeah,
So
please go ahead.
yeah, so RCEP is, as I said, so we were very serious. So since 2012, when it was launched, and we have been very seriously and intensely involved in the RCEP negotiation, as you must have noticed. And 2 times we hosted the RCEP round also in India. And from the business side, I was leading the business summit also happened, the business on the margin of RCEP rounds of negotiations. But the major challenge is that when India walked out of RCEP, of course, because you have to understand. So we were very serious till the end to be part of RCEP, but majority of our concerns were not addressed. And you all know that we have a huge trade deficit with China. So we have been struggling for last many years to bridge that and to find a more kind of. We know that the trade balance cannot be trade between bilateral trade relation between two countries cannot be perfectly balanced. But of course, it's the kind of imbalance and deficit is a huge, so which cannot be sustainable in the long run. So that point we wanted to get it addressed because of some safeguard measures and all that could not be accepted. Similarly, on the services part also, during the middle of the negotiations, we put forward 2 proposals. That those proposals were also not accepted. So in the end, so the situation it evolved. I am not discounting the fact that of course the pressure from Indian stakeholders, industry, the other political parties, civil society organizations. So India had to take a very informed view on that. The way the negotiation has progressed, the way the domestic constituency stakeholders were responding in terms of the way the negotiating process was going on. So it was a kind of right decision for the government of India. But now, if India has to get back to RCEP, I don't think I'm not privy to the government discussion, but as far as I know, no such discussions is happening at the government level. Because if you see the after the withdrawal from RCEP in 2019, we had changed our FTA strategy. And of course, we have seen the very significant shift in our FTA strategy. We are open to discussing the new issues. You mentioned about labor environment. So we are negotiating that. We are negotiating the digital economy chapter. We are negotiating government procurement. And also we are all the negotiations very time bound. We have within less than 3 months we have concluded our negotiation with UAE. We have concluded our negotiation with Australia. We are going ahead with UK. We are going ahead with European Union. There is a very significant change, and we have shown to the world that we are serious in engaging our partners in FTL. We are open to their issues. So all that is getting reflected in India's trade figure. Also, you can see that we have achieved the highest ever number in exports, touching $450 billion of goods export, more than 300 billion of services exports. So far we are progressing well, but of course going forward we have a challenge because to sustain this kind of growth momentum in exports, we require to be part of global value chain, and that is what we are discussing in the GVC in the G20 also, and we see the ASEAN region has to play a major role in India getting a part of regional value chain. So to that extent, we want a strong relations with ASEAN because ASEAN is centrality is very important as far as the GVC is concerned, as far as the economic relation in this region of the world, and that India has on record has accepted this. So we would definitely like very strong relation with ASEAN. So I would just stop here, ma'am, and look forward to
Thank you.
any question.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar. You've raised some very important points and also responded partly to some of the questions raised by our fellow panelists, the previous 3 speakers. We'll, of course, come to the round of questions very soon. But I will first request Dr. K. Yom, Senior Fellow of Asian Conference Shillong, to kindly make his presentation. Dr. Yom is research. He has done research in regional and sub-regionalism, both in South Asia and Southeast Asia. And given his research work, he's a prolific writer and he's published extensively. And so, given his expertise on this particular area of regionalism and sub-regionalism, I think it would be a good. We look forward to listening to him. I don't know whether you would be interested in maybe throwing some light on maybe focusing a little bit upon within India ASEAN framework on the Mekong Ganga cooperation or India's efforts at building relationship with the CLMV countries, project oriented action that we have tried to move forward in the CLMV countries. But those are yet other issues that come to mind. But of course, you're welcome to make your presentation on your thoughts and share your thoughts on how we can move forward in further enhancing India-ASEAN relations. Thank you. You have the floor, yes, for 12 minutes. Thank you. I think you're on mute. Dr. Yom, you're on mute.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Now,
Thank you so much, ma'am. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this very important conversation on India-ASEAN. The speakers before me, they have covered a lot of ground, particularly on the economic side of it. I think what I'll do, and that's the area that I work on, is on the geopolitical side, the political aspect of, and the security aspect of India-ASEAN relations. And I'll definitely touch upon the Mekong Ganga cooperation that ma'am has, talked about. But let me just begin by, asking this question about India-ASEAN relations as to how India-ASEAN can ensure that the partnership remain a force in this rapidly changing geopolitical dynamics in the region. I think once we frame our discussion around that question, two or three things actually flow out of that, which is one is, of course, then India ASEAN starts to select or choose what are the the most critical issues that the two sides confronts today as far as players in the regions are concerned. Let's say, for instance, ASEAN. I think for ASEAN, one of the key challenges today is to ensure that it remains a driving force in the Indo-Pacific region. As we all know, in recent years, ASEAN's role has been seen as underperforming, not effective enough to bring about regional security and stability. There are examples, whether it's South China Sea, whether it's Myanmar. So I think for ASEAN as a regional institutional player or an actor, one of the key dilemma or one of the key questions that the grouping is facing is how do we ensure that ASEAN remains credible, ASEAN remains an important player in the Indo-Pacific region. I think that's one question that we need to frame our discussion. And on the Indian side, I think, as we all know, India is a rising power, and for India, how do India, let's say, achieves its aspirations as a rising power? How it can demonstrate as a regional, responsible regional player, responsible regional rising power. I think it's again that's a question that India confronts as far as its region, its neighborhood is concerned. So I think one of the key aspects of ASEAN-India partnership today is how do the two think about investing in the rise, in the aspirations, in the ambitions of each other. So I think once we select, once we keep these critical issues in mind, and then start thinking about how the two can invest in each other's ambitions, then I think we can sort of frame what are these critical issues that needs to be taken up or that needs to be looked at. And to my mind, I think the earlier speakers, some of them have also mentioned about the current geopolitical dynamics. And to my mind, I would argue that
Seem to have lost connection. Pankaj, could you kindly check whether Dr. Hume is connected to us?
Sure, ma'am. Let me call him and we'll check.
But I think he was making some very important points, and it's a shame that we could not hear the concluding part. We're also running short of time, so I was wondering whether we should wait or we can continue with Dr. Rahul Mishra, if Dr. Rahul Mishra is there.
Thank you, ma'am. Shall I start or should we wait for?
Could we just give 30 seconds to see whether Pankaj is able to establish contact with Dr. Yom? As soon as he puts, yes, Pankaj, any news?
Ma'am, we are trying. Just give me 30 seconds more. We are trying his number.
Okay, because I thought that, we of course having a very good chain of thought coming from him. I don't want to break that.
Yeah.
But I find that it's already 11:53 and we have to stop at 12 o'clock. So if you can't establish contact with Dr. Yom, maybe we can request Dr. Rahul Mishra to make his presentation. And then if Dr. Yom joins us later, then we'll ask him to complete his thoughts.
Sure, ma'am.
Okay.
Sure.
So then, Dr. Rahul Mishra, if you could just kindly share your thoughts. You, like others, don't need an introduction. Director of the Center for ASEAN Regional University, MLA, and you have, of course, co-authored this book with Dr. S.D. Muni, which I think is an amazing publication. So, heartiest congratulations on that. I have been recommending that book for reading to anybody who is a student of India-ASEAN relations or India's Act East policy. So, heartiest congratulations on that, and thank you for kindly joining us. I would have said a few more words about you, but I think if you could just kindly begin in the interest of time. Thank you. Yes,
Thank
please
you.
go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Excellency, for that very kind introduction and very encouraging words. Very good afternoon, good morning from Cochin, Sarawak, where I'm organizing my own Indo-Pacific dialogue in about 7 minutes from now. So, but I just could not say no to Professor Sachin Chaturvedi's request, and
So
of course,
we got you just in time.
yes, thank you,
thank you.
for
Please
that,
go ahead.
and thanks to also to Pankaj for this very kind invitation, very timely conversation that we are having. And I thought I'll focus on recent developments that are happening in the ASEAN region and in what ways India fits in this dynamics. All of us are aware that this week is going to be very stressful and in many ways tough for for the ASEAN diplomats. And it would be interesting to see how events unfold from the Indian point of view, from the point of view of ASEAN's dialogue partners, as also from the point of view of Quad countries. So what I plan to do is I'll just quickly raise 6 points, maybe give each of them a minute and a half, and then conclude. And I mean, all of us know that there are so many good things happening in the ASEAN region, and ASEAN-India relations have, of course, moved from strength to strength. And I think all of my fellow panelists have been quite optimistic. I was hoping some fireworks from Dr. Yom, but he got he had some network issues. So let me raise these difficult questions in India-ASEAN relationship and also ASEAN as a regional organization, the challenges it is facing, the challenges ASEAN and India together are facing, but also challenges in which are shared and where India and other dialogue partners could play a role. And let me start with the South China Sea dispute first. Just about a week ago, China's um, China came up with new national maps, which also are an attempt to cartographically intrude into Indian territory. But what is more surprising is that it also intrudes into Malaysian and Filipino territories. Of course, the 9-dash line also affects Indonesia in many ways, and Dr. Intan Ramli is here. Maybe he can throw some light on this at a later stage. But this is a cause of concern for many countries. And living in Malaysia and working in Malaysia for almost 6 years now, I realized that this is one of the rare moments when a country like Malaysia, which is very positively and in a positively disposed towards China, and in a very I would say the neutrality is tilted in favor of China, of course, because of trade dependence, but there are other factors as well. And a very strong reaction coming out from the Malaysian side, which almost matches the Filipino as well as the Indian reaction. It's something that tells us that South China Sea dispute is not going to stay as muted as it was 5 years or 10 years ago. Things are going to change now because even the fence sitter, the neutral countries, are standing up for their rights, standing up for their causes. And this is going to make an impact on South China Sea. How does this relate with India? China has actually made things quite a lot easier for India and other dialogue partners, because the issue now is not compartmentalized anymore. It is not just about territory. India, China seen as a different frame, different box, and South China Sea as a different one. Now what we are seeing is that China is not able to appreciate the concerns and anxieties that its neighbors have, and in that bigger box of Indo-Pacific, if you want to use the term, these challenges, the normative challenges, the international law challenges are emanating. And I believe this opens up new possibilities of talking about a rules-based order, how to resolve disputes in territorial, maritime, and land boundaries, and what role India and ASEAN could play. So perhaps, I don't know, Her Excellency, Madam Chair could perhaps initiate something on those lines. I mean, India and ASEAN through CSCAP or ARF, I don't know, there are so many expert committees, initiate a dialogue on rules-based order and land and maritime boundaries, and in what ways we can work together. The second, of course, is supply chain mechanism and resilience. We already have with Australia and Japan a trilateral supply chain initiative that has been in talks for quite some time. But there is also a possibility of reinvigorating Indo-Pacific wide supply chain contacts. So while I totally agree with Dato Ramesh Kodamal's point that India has to do something more on RCEP, but there are so many ways to go about it. I mean, there are so many ways to skin a cat, as it were. So I think there is a possibility for countries like Japan and India and Australia to work together with ASEAN and see in what other ways we can make our supply chains more resilient. And of course, India is a kind of missing link in RCEP and region-wide mega trade network. So perhaps initiating a dialogue is never a problem. But mutual appreciation of concerns is a challenge. And that is how India had to walk away from RCEP. Rules of origin is not a simple clause. It's way complicated than we non-economists think it is. My third point is the recent developments on the currency front between India and Malaysia. We've started using Indian rupee as a mode of exchange, and that perhaps is leading us to what is also called as de-dollarization. I mean, nobody wants to bring dollar to archives, but there is certainly a possibility of using local currencies. Whether and in what ways we can expand this experiment. Can we make it an ASEAN-wide experiment where ASEAN countries use Indian rupee? Or can we also talk about a bunch of currencies that are operational in that can be a kind of currency basket in the Indo-Pacific region. Can that be a possibility? So I think moving forward, this could perhaps be one of the very good experiment that we can do in this region, having already started with Russia and Malaysia. My next point is, what role could India play in this really pressing a crisis of utmost urgency, and that is Myanmar? You talk to ASEAN diplomats and policymakers, and they're almost coming to consensus that ASEAN really does not have many leverages, many tools that it can use in bringing Myanmar back on track or restoring democracy in Myanmar. So which are the countries that have these tools, these strong leverages? India, China, Thailand, and to a certain extent, Japan. Perhaps India should, now understanding that the crisis has really gone too far, and from a political crisis, it has turned into a humanitarian crisis with no end in sight. 5-point consensus has almost failed, and I'm sure that this week when ASEAN leaders meet, they are going to discuss whether ASEAN 5-point consensus has to be revised, or they should come up with something new. I mean, these are questions that are bothering scholars and policymakers alike as to what to do with 5-point consensus, for example, or are there any alternative mechanisms? And I think India could, without getting into a formal negotiation mechanism, India could offer its good offices and make use of its back channel diplomacy to at least initiate a point of contact, initiate the dialogue between military junta and ASEAN leaders, and also NUG and other rebel fighters. Because end of the day, no matter how much you hate General Min Aung Hlaing, you have to talk to him to restore democracy in Myanmar. I mean, there is no other way than engaging the military junta. They are going to, even after, we don't know when, but even after democracy is restored in Myanmar, Tatmadaw will be one of the strongest forces, and that has to be kept in mind. And that's why need for a dialogue, and India using its good offices along with China and perhaps Thailand. I would say that India and Thailand and Japan could provide a very good platform, which can also be joined by China. And that, of course, opens up new possibilities. And we have seen that India-China dispute has not been a hindrance in BRICS. It has not been a problem. Generally, it has not been a problem in G20. So I think in multilateral fora, in minilateral fora, this has not been really a challenge. And new ways could be devised. My last and final point is about Indo-Pacific, of course. The centrality, Dr. Yom talked about centrality, and perhaps I'll just add a couple of points on that. ASEAN centrality in view of these, the growing rivalry and diplomatic war at multiple fronts between the US and China has led ASEAN centrality in troubles. And ASEAN is really not sure whether Indo-Pacific is the way out, whether they should stick to Asia-Pacific, whether they should use their convening power to try and at least ease the tension between US and China. And I think in that context, the role of rising powers and middle powers becomes very important. The role of India, the role of Japan, South Korea, Australia. The rising powers are going to play a very important role in US-China rivalry, which we hope doesn't turn into a conflict. So I think on the Indo-Pacific discourse, there's been a lot going on in Indonesia as to how to deal with the slow progress on Indo-Pacific. There's also been discussion on Indo-Pacific Forum and creating Indo-Pacific architecture, at least a swifter mechanism to deal with challenges with regards to policy making, ASEAN's overall decision-making process, but also questions related to implementing ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific. And I think in that context, the ASEAN Maritime Outlook, which was launched just last month, is a very positive development. ASEAN Maritime Outlook certainly goes back to to all those normative and rules-based issues related to a rules-based order, and South China Sea included. That gives us hope that ASEAN is very much alive and kicking. It is working hard to ensure its centrality. And India has really a lot of agenda points on which it can work with ASEAN and make this regional organization a success, keeping it central, keeping it relevant, keeping it useful, not only in the Southeast Asian context, but also in the wider Indo-Pacific context. So I'll stop there, ma'am, and welcome questions, if any.
Thank you so much for raising these difficult questions, but I think they've also provided us a lot of food for thought on very critical issues of geopolitical and strategic interest, both to India and to ASEAN. And I think while some of our panel speakers had focused on the economic dimensions of the relationship, I think you've brought it out to the more strategic geopolitical issues. So thank you for drawing attention. You picked up the thread where Dr. Yom left, and I see that he's back with us. We've run out of time, but I would still not want to close the session without hearing his concluding remarks. So, Dr. Yom, if in about a couple of minutes, if you could kindly conclude your thoughts, because we would want to have an incomplete presentation from you. So, please, you have the floor.
Oh, thank you. I'm so sorry about that. I just want to add, I think my friend Rahul has also said, touch a lot of issues that one would have wanted to say. Just one point on the Bay of Bengal sub-region, I would call it. We have the BIMSTEC, a sub-regional grouping. Today, this grouping has not really come into the picture of India-ASEAN's relations. I think if at the India-ASEAN's partnership, if the two can also work together to push, to give that push to strengthen the BIMSTEC, that would also be in the interest of the the BIMSTEC as well as for India ASEAN. The reason being, there are group members from both South and Southeast Asia, and perhaps the next idea could be to expand BIMSTEC to include Malaysia, Indonesia, because given that there are very important littorals there, so that would then give a little bit of equal representation from both regions as well. So I think I would imagine that to strengthen an area that can strengthen the relationship is also to actually work on the BIMSTEC and build on that, to build that relationship between India and ASEAN. I'll stop here, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Pankaj, are there any questions? Because I know that we've run out of time, but I would definitely like to hear last words from all our distinguished panelists. So can I just go ahead and give them a couple of minutes to share their concluding thoughts? Pankaj, could you just quickly respond? Are there any questions?
So in chat box, we have mostly kind of received comments.
Yes.
Comments. So there is not much of a question.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Fine. So then, in which case, I will. And can we just continue for the next 10 minutes to conclude? Is that okay, Pankaj?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll just conclude. And I see that Dr. Pankaj Mishra Rahul Mishra has raised his hand. So maybe we can go backwards, because I think you said that you have another panel discussion. So maybe if you could, before you move to your next discussion, please share your concluding thoughts, and then I'll go in the order of our speakers as we began to have their concluding remarks in just 2 minutes each. So Dr. Rahul Mishra, please, you had the floor.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll conclude by saying that when you mentioned this in your opening remarks, when we started in 1992, the reinvigorating our eastward engagement in 1992, a lot of scholars, generally based in Singapore, but also from Indonesia, Malaysia, they said that India-ASEAN engagement is a glass half empty. You can see it as a glass half full. Over a period of time, with our policymakers, with our astute bureaucrats and diplomats, including you, ma'am, and there's really a very powerful list of diplomats and military officers who contributed to India-ASEAN engagement over past 30 years. And this glass is no longer half full, it is almost 3/4 now. All we have to do now is working towards greater engagement. And I think the Japanese model, or let us say the Australian model in case of engagement with Malaysia, for example, is the one that we have to work on. India could perhaps follow the Japanese model in terms of greater economic engagement, working more in infrastructure and connectivity. I know BIMSTEC is working and Mekong Ganga is also there. But there is a possibility of stronger trade engagements, stronger connectivity and infrastructure engagement, while we are working at a very good pace in terms of diplomatic and strategic engagements. Also, upscaling our defense engagement with BrahMos to Philippines and military supplies to Vietnam, but also Subang Port with Indonesia. So these are very positive developments. I think we just have to keep up the pace and work more on our relatively weaker areas, which include infrastructure, connectivity, and trade. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. I think those are very, very valuable suggestions. And I'm sure somewhere through this panel discussion, some of these very interesting ideas will definitely percolate. I'm aware that RIS is a very important think tank for India, and their thoughts definitely do reach the government of India. So I'm sure everything that's been captured today's panel discussion will somehow also reach our officials who obviously want to work towards further enhancing India-ASEAN relations. I think we've had a very good discussion, a very in-depth discussion, some frustrations expressed about why we are not moving faster. On the economic front, of course, the RCEP has been talked about, but alternatives about reviewing the FTA and identifying specific areas which are the impediments, I think are a good beginning. Now, on the other hand, there's also been an attention given to geopolitical issues, geostrategic issues of core concern. In any case, ASEAN and India do need each other. While India has worked for ASEAN centrality and unity, I think it's important to also remember that the elephant in the room, let's call it, the dragon in the room, shall we say, since we did mention China a couple of times, I think is an area for cooperation, not just on the economic dimension, but on the political and strategic dimension as well. Dr. Intan Ramli had mentioned that, if we did not participate in RCEP, then there would be trade diversification. But I think what COVID has taught us one lesson, and that is not to put all your eggs in one basket. And I think that is, especially at a time when India is in a sweet spot of growth and people are looking to India not just as a market, but as a solution to many issues. And I think we will continue to give this importance to ASEAN, our partnership with the regional grouping, as well as our bilateral relations with each of the 10 ASEAN countries. And with these thoughts from my perspective as an Indian, I would definitely request Dr. Intan Ramli to just conclude very quickly with her concluding thoughts, if you can wind it up in 2 minutes, and then I'll give the floor to the other speakers as well. So, Dr. Intan, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Ambassador. Definitely, we know that economic integration is not everything, but indeed, we have seen the benefits, which are manifold. We can actually see from the economic cooperation and growth, it actually promotes peace somehow, stability and prosperity. So it is important, I think, for both parties, ASEAN and India, to continue working together to strengthen the partnership, the strategic partnership. And moving forward also, I think this is where perhaps to continue charting a more operational with modest and agenda for future cooperation, and also look forward at forging a forward-looking approach. So in conclusion, I really looking forward for the review of the ASEAN-India FTA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Intan Ramli. Dato Ramesh Kondamal, I request you to share your concluding thoughts in 2 minutes.
Mute. Sir, you are on mute.
You're on mute, Dato. We can't hear you.
Madam Excellency, my only wish is that the ASEAN-India FTA should be reviewed which we hope so. But I'm a little concerned on this issue because at the last meeting which we had a few weeks ago in Jakarta and Semarang, they came up with the idea that this FTA will be reviewed in 2025. So I'm still trying to wonder, is it just prolonging it or coming up with some new idea? Because this actually frustrates the business community, not only in ASEAN but also in India. You don't need such a long time to review an FTA, which can be done for the benefit of businessmen and for the economy of both the areas. So I just hope something good could be done, and I'm very sure the authorities, this message should be passed on to them. The faster they do, the better it is for the economy to move forward between ASEAN and India. It has been too long for an FTA to be reviewed. And never, I think we can go into a record now that an FTA has taken so long to be reviewed. Maybe we might go into the Guinness Book of Records.
I'm sure there are other FTAs that have taken longer, but I think when the push comes from the business side, you did point out particularly that it's important for the SME sector to engage. I would say, in any case, I think it's very important for the business communities to continue to remain engaged on both sides because you, apart from the hard core commercial aspects of the relationship, I think you are able to give us your inputs about what the impediments are. Ultimately, at the government to government level, I think the government can merely change the rules or become a facilitator. But the actual commercial transactions takes place through the business community. And there too, if there is a constant communication and connectivity, is an important way forward. But thank you for your thoughts. And I'll just request now Mr. Pranav Kumar to share his concluding thoughts in 2 minutes.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And in fact, I agree with Siddhartha Ramesh that 2025, 2 years for review is too long a period, particularly when the business side from both the countries, both the regions are very keen to see the review process to go forward. But here the problem is that India is going for election next year. So that will lose some time in terms of the getting adequate political attention for the review, because at the end of the day, it is the political call which will push it through. That the negotiators will take it to the D, but final kick has to be by the political leaders. So that could must have been factored, because in next year in May we'll have a general election. So and new government will come. So uh, the second point on the just further elaborating the RCEP part. So let's be very practical, and I don't think India is going back to the RCEP block. But what we can be more on the optimistic side, that another important agreement which is being negotiated, that is IPF, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. Of course, this is a different kind of agreement where we are not negotiating tariff, but that is not a major issue in my own view, because India already has free trade agreement with most of the countries in this region except China and New Zealand. If you look at the RCEP bloc, so with Australia also we have operationalized and negotiating comprehensive agreement. So RCEP would add, because there are four pillars. India is not a party to trade pillar, but of course on clean energy pillar, clean economy pillar, and also the most important supply chain pillar. So India is very actively involved, and what we hear from our negotiators that this will be completed by November. So with IPEF and existing bilateral FTA, that will provide enough ammunition to us to go forward in further deepening the trade relation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Dr. Hyom has already made his concluding remarks. So, unless you want to say something else, would you like to add, or we can conclude?
No, ma'am, that's fine.
Okay. Okay. So I think this has been a very, very fruitful and a very rich discussion. We could have continued for another hour, but I think all of us have commitments, and so we will have to conclude at this stage. I'll merely request RIS to perhaps consider holding a similar session to continue our discussions, maybe after the India ASEAN summit meeting has been held. Maybe this would be a good opportunity to review how much of the thoughts and concerns expressed by our panelists today were incorporated or addressed during the upcoming meeting. And I think it has to continue to remain an ongoing discussion at all levels, not just at the government to government level, but also, I think, at the level of businesses, at the level of think tanks, amongst universities, amongst the people. I think that is the richness of the India ASEAN relationship, that is not restricted to one level or only to one sector. And here, I think RIS has played a seminal role. The India ASEAN Center at RIS, in particular, I think, has done a great job in keeping the momentum of intellectual inputs to the India ASEAN relationship. So I'd like to thank RIS for one, convening this meeting, two, thank them for the great work that they continue to do on research, on bringing out new ideas, on putting together wonderful panelists like today's panel. And finally, in conclusion, really a very, very deep appreciation to all our panel speakers for coming up with some brilliant ideas. You've all spoken from your heart. I can tell, just as I'm very deeply committed to India ASEAN relations, I can see that each one of you is also very deeply committed to this relationship. And I'm sure collectively, if we keep pushing our governments, we should be able to make this relationship get higher and higher and better. So thank you and a very good day to all of you. And namaste.
Thank you very
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Pankaj. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining in. It was great that you could spare some time. Uh,
Oh, no,
it was,
it's
I
a
mean, it was
pleasure.
pity that we lost you in between.
Yeah, I think the network issue, I wasn't aware until Sampa called up to. So I was going on with my presentation. Is
Yeah.
it over now? Yeah?
Yeah, yeah, it's over. It's over.
Okay, okay. All right then.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay. Bye bye. Yeah,
Bye, bye,
yeah,
bye.
yeah. Bye bye.